Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mariusz Wszolek. I come from Poland, SWBS University of Social Sciences and Humanities, Graphic Design Department, and today I will talk about city as a packaging for social system or social communication. During architecture and urbanism conference, we usually experience very interesting lectures about theoretical city concepts like Le Corbusier, beautiful architectural landscapes, or social experiments. Since I started interesting in the city as a communication construct, I usually hear about Norman Foster design concept, critics of Le Corbusier, or pragmatism of Jan Gehl or Jane Jacobs. And of course, it's really interesting. But what is the most important and exciting for me is how people use city for their own purpose. I'm really into city language, social movements in the city, and grassroots solutions for making city more safe, comfortable, and usable. On this slide, you can see, for example, a very important statement. I love Basha, which is Barbara, actually, my neighbor. As far as I know them, and I know them pretty well, unfortunately, they don't know Mr. Milton Glaser, who designed I Love New York logo with the heart concept. Nevertheless, my neighbors use this visual language to make their own statement, and of course, not only them. According to that, what do we actually know about city? Do we know anything about city language made not by professionals, but by citizens, inhabitants? I've started asking this kind of question with the very primary research method, questionnaire about image of a city, which I'd like to present today. In the coming years, in the social, demographic, and communication context, as well as in urban planning, the city will become the main area of changes. Thus, it becomes important to study forming process and the possibilities of managing change not only in the urban and architectural dimension, but above all in the social and communication one, taking into account the entire repertoire of method and tool of the area of research and design of social communication. This presentation presents the result of research on the perception of the city by its inhabitants in order to be able to learn the broadest possible linguistic representation of this concept. It is interesting above all what people say and how they speak about the city. Studies on culture and theories related to it more and more often refer to the issues of communication. It is difficult to overestimate the culture forming role of communication, especially since communication seems to be a necessary condition for the formation of society. Although there is no single definition of communication, in the recent decades, the research on communication and the accompanying system approaches have provided a fundamental contribution to the development of humanities and social sciences. It seems that communication understood a specific social game in the form of negotiation meanings may constitute an adequate supplement to the current consideration on the city. On the one hand, in the order to be able to create model using the available and future computing resources, and on the other hand, relating to the main postulate of designing communication, organizing and stabilizing the society by ensuring differentiation, the culture of participation, and the capacity of or for diversity. From the design point of view, the basic range of packaging function focus on securing the product, its trouble-free transport, storage, and in distinguishing it from the competition on in purchasing situation. It is the same for the city that is supposed to protect, enable movement or stay, using in function and finally integrate, thus ensuring the distinctive character of the city. The starting point for deliberation on the ways of social and communication function of the city, and in view of modeling such solutions, in the future should be getting to know the perception of various social groups on the semantics of the construct of the city. The point of departure is studying the city from the perspective of communication, was studying the functioning of the very concept of a city in its linguistic representation obtained in the mode of linguistic empiricism. The aim of the research project is the semantic verification of the concept of a city on a possibility representative research group. To achieve the above goal, a questionnaire with standardized list of open questions was prepared and supplemented with basic demographic information. The form of questionnaire will help in pursuing detailed research goals in the area of communication research, association, functions, differential, and vision. Such a structure of research issues made it possible to prepare a list of questions that will comprehensively cover the possible communication strategies in their linguistic representation about what a city is and could be for its inhabitants. Since the city is the main area of civilization changes, it is important to get to know the ideas of considering and it is semantic representation in order to be able to adequately respond to dynamic social, technological, and cultural changes in the future. Currently, little is known about communicative and linguistic functioning of the people or the city. The scope of collected data is presented in a table you can see on the slide. The survey was conducted on the sample of 524 respondents in the form of CAVI, which is Computer Assisted Web Interview. Such a research tool allowed collecting a large number of simple answers during the lockdown period resulting from COVID-19 pandemic. The study was conducted in January 2021. The collected data was used for qualitative analysis of frequencies, taking into account the following steps: data lemmatization, categorization, and calculation of the frequency of categories, and indication of significant statistical relationship using simple statistical tests like Chi-Phi or V-Grammar. With regard to the adopted assumption and research issues, a questionnaire was prepared with the following list of, of research questions. You can already see on the slide all of the questions, of course, were open. What do you associate a city with? What do you think is a typical city? What is your opinion is an unusual city? What do you think the city is for? What is your opinion in the difference between a city and a village? What is the city where you live like? What is the difference between city you live in and other cities? And the city used to be, the city today is, and the city of the future is. As a result of the research, 8,801 individual responses from the respondent were obtained, which translate into an average of 800 responses to one question. Let's see the result in the general categories: association, function, differential, and vision. The empirical results showed that the responses associate the city with a cluster of people, which is reflected into result presented on the current slide, where such an association is declared by almost 16% of the respondents. The social character of the city is also reflected in the list of responses in the next result, where a typical city is full of people. It's 13.1%. And respondents describe an unusual city as empty, depopulated, or quiet, not crowded, 16.3%. The second distinctive group of categories that the responses associate city with are developed, have buildings. In terms of the character of a typical city, the issue of building is the most frequently represented category, developed, 18.3%. Although this category does not appear in the question about unusual city, which is really interesting, I suppose. What is interesting? From the perspective of a researcher, and depressing from the perspective of an inhabitant, is the image of an A typical city described by response as green, ecological 11.1 and clean and tidy 5.7%. In opposition to unusual city, a typical city is described inter alia as congested, crowded, loud, noisy, dirty, and polluted, which might be related to current communications related to climate protection and sustainable development, of course. Second category, which is city function. Defining the city as a social packaging essentially boils down to defining its function. Product packaging protects the product, secures it during transport, and allows for its trouble-free use. Does the city fulfill similar functions as the packaging of an ordinary product? According to the response, the city is mainly used for work and earning money, 20.4%. Housing, 17.2%. And living, 10.6%. Respondents also indicate such function as entertainment, 8%, and fulfilling needs, 8.1%. In this approach, the city meets the basic needs of every inhabitant. It allows them to make a living in a certain conditions, city conditions in this case, performs a protective function for the residents according to the same principle as the packaging of any product. An attempt to explore this issue in the form of a question about the possibility of using what the city has to offer reveals its two basic functions: work, 18.4%, and entertainment in the form of the category have fun, enjoy, and be entertained. Attend cultural centers as well, 13.6%. It would be too much to say that these are the dominant functions of the city, but the data present in the slide allows us highlight a certain dichotomy of function. On the one hand, there are protective functions, work, security, transport, and on the other hand, social ones, entertainment, culture, comfort, convenience, development, which is related to the same dichotomy of packaging design functions. Let's go to third category, which is differential. In differential context, the respondents were asked to indicate the distinctive feature of the city compared to the countryside. The most numerous category were lifestyle and noise, which is 15.5%, and population density, which is 15.8%. The issue of the scale in the sense of size was represented by 7.7% of all responses. According to responses, a characteristic feature that distinguishes the city from the countryside is also the type and number of buildings and access to service and trade, which is in fact coincidence with the function of the city. Moreover, the respondents were asked about the city they lived in and what makes the city different from of other cities. In the first question, the respondents mainly referred to the scale of the city, describing it as big or small. The respondents often described their city as well-kept, friendly, and developed, attractive. In this case of feature differentiating the city of residents from other cities, the issue of landscape, location, and site appear in the first place, which is a reference to the previous question you've seen before. An interesting category of responses are those concerning private feelings and specific atmosphere, which appeared in 10% of the responses, and heritage history. In conclusion, it should be noted that the main differential regarding a city is its size, population, lifestyle, and the related atmosphere. The issue of specific building and architecture is equally important, but gives way to issues related to the scale, development, and sociality. Let's see the last category of city, the image of a city. The last research issue presented in this presentation is the vision of the city in relation to history and the present. For the respondents, the city used to be primarily a settlement town, 12.9%, which may indicate that the city is perceived as a process of its development in the context of scale, which means size, of course. Such inference seems to be legitimate due to the image of the city in the time of scale, in this time of scale. Sorry. This city also used to have different building and architectures. 11.9. It was the center and seat of the authorities. 11.3%, which would indicate the distinctive character of the city as a privileged space for living and exercising power. Today, the city is perceived primarily from the perspective of the consequence of the scale. Urban sprawl, metropolis, cluster of people, community, or development. The category of scale is followed by two dimensions of the definition: modernity and development, and traffic congestion, noise, hustle, and bustle, which is summed to 14.2%. An interesting question in this context is the question about vision of the city. The question about the city of the future is in fact a question about the deficits of the present. In this context, the respondents have indicated primarily new technologies which constituted an interesting reference to the concept of a smart city. The city of the future, discussed in terms of the deficits of the present, is also described by respondents as comfortable, neat, ecological, and development center, some up to 18.7%. On the other hand, the respondents point to the deepening city forming process, indicating that the city of the future should be perceived in terms of an economic center, 8.4%, dense development, least greenery, 8.1%, or the problem of overpopulation, which is 6.4%. The emerging of triptych, once now in the future, is a picture of a city's development mainly in the terms of its scale and technology. Interestingly, the same function of the city, though to a different degree, are represented in each question regardless to the time, past, present, future, work, commerce, entertainment. The obtained data show that the city is primarily perceived from the perspective of social relation. In this area, respondents see the characteristic of the city, which also translate into the dichotomy of its function, which can be defined precisely by the category of social function, social relations, entertainment, culture, and protective function, shelter, houses, flat, work. Although this is probably not a discovery for architects and town planners, the answer emerging from the present results force us to reflect on the current design applied in the city and for its residents. The semantics of the city as such is ambiguous and certainly not fully positive. Respondents point to the problem that architects and city planners are also familiar with: overcrowding, pollutions, noise. The long term of the research project that defines the city in the terms of the packaging of social system is to seek and model specific solution in the area of socially sensitive cities. The aim is to build a model that will not focus on the providing technological solutions or offering the city to selected and privileged social groups, for example, creative class, but will take into account the city from the perspective of sustainable development and broadly understood accessibility, according, for example, to May's universal design. The search for this solution should begin with communication image of the city, because communication is responsible for the creation and maintenance of society, and the society needs an environment adequate to their life and survival. I will try to make the same research in the international context and same research with taking into account the characteristic of specific city. What's the difference between New York, Chicago, Warsaw, Paris, and so on and so on. I also try to analyze cities' single signage and wayfinding according to professional ones and signage according to how people describe their own neighborhood by visual language, for example. Of course, what is interesting for me is a design goal, design raster pattern for socially sensitive cities. What is the characteristic of social sensitive cities? This is the question I'd like to put on the table. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm ready to your questions. Thank you again.